There are a ton of really serious mistakes that you can make as you grow your account in Rise of Kingdoms. Trust me, I've spent over 2,000 consecutive days playing on multiple accounts, and I've grown to over 200 million power, fallen much lower than that, and there are some things I've learned along the way. So stick around in this video for 8 of the biggest mistakes you can make in Rise of Kingdoms. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and as you can see, I have collected the overwhelming majority of the legendary commanders in the game. I've made lots of endgame, top tier, legendary, iconic, tiered equipment. I've collected some of the best armaments you can get your hands on, and I have made some mistakes along the way. So this video is designed to help you not make some of these really major mistakes. Some of them are very recoverable. Others are going to hurt for a really long time, assuming you continue to play the game. So let's jam through these 8 major mistakes. And if this is the kind of stuff you're interested in, consider smashing that subscribe button, joining the almost 250,000 people that are subscribed to the channel as of the time of this recording. The first mistake, big mistake that you can make in Rise of Kingdoms is not planning for having an infantry march, an archer march, and a cavalry march. You want at least one of each. Now, at the start of the game, many players think, I'm going to be a cavalry player or an infantry player or an archer player, and you can focus. However, there are several major forces that will drive you away from over-specializing your account. The first major reason that you will not see at the start of the game is that when you get a little bit further along, you're going to get access to this thing called the formation system. The formation system is effectively loot slot machines for these things called armaments, where you can get stats across all kinds of things. In fact, they can be stats you really value, like this is all infantry stuff and all damage, that's great. Or you can get armaments that have stats for things you don't care about at all, like gold gathering speed. And you put this on your, combat march, you hope for armaments that are like this, but you end up with a bunch that are pretty mixed here. Now, I've saved some really good ones, but the point I'm trying to make is that since this system is centered around randomness, you are going to pick one formation to start. It's probably going to be wedge, which is going to increase your skill damage, and it's going to give you these armaments randomly. You're going to get some good archer ones. You're going to get some good infantry ones. You're going to get some good cavalry ones. But you're probably not going to get 5 really good sets of cavalry ones, not without spending a lot of money. So the first big mistake you can make is over-specializing in one troop type. And at the start of the game, you should plan to have 1 infantry, 1 archer, 1 cavalry march, and you can decide which of those troop types later you might want 2 marches of infantry or 3 marches of infantry. You can decide that later, okay? I'm an infantry guy. That doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. What is the best does change periodically based on what's meta. And that's topic for a separate video. In fact, I make that video pretty much every month for what's meta. So the first big mistake is to not plan to have a diversity of marches, simply because the game, when you get to the end game, will randomly give you these armaments, even if you're spending, and you just can't plan to get a bunch that are good for one troop type. And if you don't have a bunch that are good for the troops you're using, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. All right, let's get to the next mistake. And the next major mistake is going to be partially investing in lots of legendary commanders. Let me explain. Of course, you'll figure out very early that your legendary commander sculptures are very limited. But if you go in and you don't max specific legendary commanders to use in the open field, you instead put a couple sculptures here, a couple sculptures there. You end up with a bunch of armies that are all fairly suboptimal. And I think the better long-term strategy in the game is to say, hey, this is the legendary I'm going to max. And if you pick the right few, which by the way, I am one of many content creators who will help you know which are the right few commanders to go invest in, those investments will last you literally for years. So as an example, Nevsky's been good for 2 or 3 years. Skippy Prime has been good for a really long time, and he's probably not going anywhere. Newer commanders that have come out in the endgame, Herman Prime, Liu Che, it is very easy to identify in the end game which of those commanders are going to be really, really long-lasting investments. So your game plan, even if you're a free-to-play player or low spender, ought to be knowing which of those commanders are the right ones to invest in and waiting until there's community alignment around what those commanders are. Then you move all in, and eventually, over years, you end up with a really nice roster. And that is how you end up with that nice diversity of infantry, archers, and cavalry. As I said with the first mistake, you're picking the very best commanders that are coming out. You pick the ones that are focused on the open field. And over time, you'll end up in a great spot. And just to give some examples of early game commanders that we still use, Guan Yu is one of the first infantry commanders to get released after it was like the very first, I don't know, KVK season 3 or 4. Like, he released years ago. I mean, I think I can show you in the info button how long ago I unlocked him, right? Date recruited, 2020, okay? Is that January 6th? Or is that, I don't know. Either way, doesn't really matter, 2020, all right? And I'm still using him. I'm still using him every day, all right? There are commanders like this in the game. Pick those, max them, and enjoy them for a long time. Don't put a ton of sculptures into a ton of commanders and max none of them. I'm not saying you can't initially do a little bit of that to get up and running, but the long-term strategy ought to be pick the winners. Other people can help you know which those are, and then just move in on them, all right? And over time, you'll get there. Now from here, we need to talk about legendary equipment. Big mistake. If you make legendary equipment without a plan, this is a disaster. Inherently, the game does not value your legendary equipment choices. You may be like, what do you mean the game does not value your legendary equipment choices? If I dismantle this legendary equipment, not only do I completely lose the pattern, all right, but I also am going to lose half the materials. Now, legendaries take a ton of materials. Like, not only is it just a large number of materials, but it takes 4 gray materials to make a green material, 4 green materials to make a blue material, 4 blue materials to make a purple material, 4 purple materials to make a legendary material. Each legendary material has a market value of 2,400 gems. It ain't cheap. So if this cost me something like, 90 legendary materials or so to make initially, I am losing 45 legendary materials to dismantle this. That definitely sucks. Now, if I go in here and I look at something that has been, so this has been refined to the point of having a special talent. So every time you try to refine a piece of equipment, okay, this is a process by which you get a stat boost. You use up 50% of the crafting cost of the item. But if I dismantle a legendary that is refined, I get back no extra materials. Oh, by the way, and every time you refine it requires patterns. The point I'm trying to make is that the game does not value your legendary equipment investments. So you had better value your legendary equipment investments. There's no changing your mind if you're like, whoopsies, I forged a pattern that I got. I got commander's boots and I made them. It's like, well, that will be suboptimal for the rest of time that you use it. And the only way to solve that problem is to eat the cost of dismantling it. So you should have a plan for your legendary equipment. You don't need it right away. And before you start making any legendary equipment, you need to know that plan. Great news. Ton of content creators out there like myself that will show you exactly what to do. I've made multiple videos where I go and do that. I'll even have a card in the end screen where I'm like, yo, this is the best stuff. In fact, every time I release a new guide about a troop type, I try to just review, by the way, here's the sequence of equipment you should make. So consider subscribing if that's the kind of stuff you're interested in. But huge mistake to craft equipment without a plan. And you may be like, oh, come on, Chisgule. Like, how much worse can this equipment be? Well, actually a lot worse. It can be a lot worse. All right. Don't even get me started on how much worse it is. Okay. And this is because in this game, the value of stats diminishes the more of a stat you have, diminishing returns. Okay. And there are lots of ways to get attack, lots of ways to get defense. Even in your alliance research, you will realize there's no health. So health is like way more valuable, and then defense ends up being more valuable than attack in most situations. There are exceptions, okay? There are definitely exceptions to the way that that can work. But one of my favorite quotes in business is to make reversible decisions quickly. Legendary equipment is not a reversible decision. It is expensive. So don't make that decision quickly. All right. As much as I really like to run in games and just move fast like that, you can't move fast with that. And that's part of the fun of a strategy game, is doing the planning. All right. So up next on the topic of planning, mistake number 4. You won't know this in the early game, but in the end game, there's a thing called crystal technology. Crystal technology is a system by which you can pay lots of money to get a big advantage over people who have not paid lots of money. It gives you a ton of stats. It gives you march speed. It gives you healing cost reduction. It gives you rate of crystal gain. Crystal is the currency you need to get all this research. So the point I'm trying to make here is you do need to plan for this. And there's plenty of ways to enjoy the game without spending a lot of money on your crystal technology, but you need to plan for it. So what I recommend for most people in their spending, and I recently did a refresh on the spending guide that I have, is that you should plan to do, even if you spend only $5 a month in Rise of Kingdoms, all right, or $10 a month, or whatever your number is, or if you're free to play, you're going to have to do a different kind of planning. You're going to have to plan to spend a lot of time AoE barb farming, separate topic. But you need to plan for this crystal technology. Allocate the majority of your spending in the game to this. And the reason is that every time you fight, think about this, your equipment, your technology, it's all a multiplier. And it's a multiplier of your resources and your speed ups, right? So if it's a multiplier of resources and speed ups, the best multiplier you can get is in fact working on your crystal technology. Once you get to the end game, that's KVK Season 4 and beyond. You don't have to worry about that until you get here. Once you do, plan for it. The other way you can plan for it is that while your power is low, it is cheap to migrate. So one thing you can consider doing is migrating to a smaller kingdom. Now I am in an Imperium kingdom. The Imperium kingdom designates me as one of the top 24 most powerful kingdoms in the end game. That's an oversimplification, but let's just run with it. So you would want to be in a smaller kingdom where it is a less competitive environment if you don't plan to spend on crystal technology. That way you can enjoy more relative power fighting against other players, all right? So this brings us to mistake number 5, which is pretty simple, but you'd be surprised how many people show up in my chats and they're like, hey, I'm free to play, but like I have the latest rally or I have the latest Garrison. And it's like, well, so maybe in Ark of Osiris, you can use that. But rally and Garrison commanders are generally not great for free to play and low spenders. And the reason is that, as I was just showing you with crystal technology, you either are maxing that crystal technology or you shouldn't be rallying and garrisoning unless you are in a very small kingdom. So this keys back into my prior advice, but also generally speaking, it's kind of like 50-50 as to whether or not these rally and garrison commanders also end up being good in the open field. So especially if you're a low spender, you should be staying away from these commanders and just focus on the open field, which has a major multiplier on, again, your effectiveness for your resources and your speed ups. And by the way, there's really no reason you should ever need to be taking rallies. Like, I'll do it and I'll get myself into those situations. But if you're taking rallies, probably mistakes have been made under the assumption you didn't want to. All right. Now, this brings us to more free-to-play value. And it's actually related to an event. The event is not here right now, but the event is called Alliance Mobilization. I've made a bunch of videos about this. I'll have a card up in the top. Everyone is familiar with Mightiest Governor, and you'll see people, and maybe this should be the real mistake for early game players, is they'll kill all their troops battling a bunch of random people in the Mightiest Governor, the first one they play, because there's a kill event. I'm like, oh my God, it's so dumb. Losing power that way is so dumb. But people get all amped up. And there's all this drama and hype around the Mightiest Governor. But like, there's this event, Alliance Mobilization, and if your alliance actually maxes out the rewards for the event, it's as good or better than the Mightiest Governor. It's just distributed across all the players in your alliance rather than a small number of players up at the top getting the majority of the rewards. Most kingdoms take alliance mobilization really casually. But if there ever was a time to spend a few dang speed ups, it's the alliance mobilization event where your whole alliance gets a huge win. The problem is you need your whole alliance to move in on it together. It's much easier to just do Mightiest Governor, solo event, you do you, and not count on other people to do their part. But if you actually can participate in an alliance that pushes as well as they can, goes for the higher value quests in the alliance mobilization, those rewards are busted, and it's shocking to me how casual so many kingdoms are about alliance mobilization, but they lose their mind over Mightiest Governor. It doesn't make sense. Don't treat alliance mobilization casually. When that event shows up, you should set a minimum point score and enforce it. And honest to goodness, farms can achieve a minimum point score that's really reasonable and better than mains at times, which is infuriating for the mains. So let's talk about that for a minute. Mistake number 7 of the 8 major mistakes we're talking about today is no farms or no alt accounts. Now look, I am breaking this rule myself right now, so you're like, Chisgule, what are you talking about? But that's because my farm got too powerful. Literally, my farm account right now is like, I don't know, like 80 million power. Yeah, 78 million power. It's too powerful. It counts against our matchmaking in a negative way. But you should have literally as many farms or alts as you can stomach and put time toward. And you want to keep them relatively low power, but you want them to have tier 4 troops. And you may be like, Chisgule, why do you need this? There's 2 reasons. The first reason is that, of course, a farm can be generating resources and then you transfer them to your main. Very easy to understand why that's valuable, although you can just buy your resources, and that is a way around the fact that, like, you're gonna need a lot of resources, okay? I spend a lot on bundles in this game. Those bundles contain resources. There's ways to buy resources, okay? The other thing that I will point out is that farms can train troops. And if your farm is training troops, well, hold on a minute. They can be making about, depending on your, troop training speed of the alliance you're in, 8,000 tier 4 troops a day. How many speed ups did that cost you? None. And if you start to think about that, all right, it's like, wait a minute. So if I made 8,000 troops a day and I did that on a farm for 90 days, that's 720,000 troops. Wait a minute, that's a lot. And if I do that at a kingdom level, no, let's just start in an alliance level. If everyone has 1 farm or alt, well, now, holy smokes, you multiply that number by 150. I need like some commas in here to see all the zeros. Are we talking about 108 million troops? If 150 people do that for 90 days? And what if each player has 5 farms? Do you see where this is going? Now, you may think, Chisgule, stop it. You're being silly. No. I should have explained this to you in the reverse way. The best kingdoms in the game are doing this. This is not a theoretical thing that I'm describing to you. This is the way the game is played. Not by a little bit, by a lot. Look, I fought against the literal strongest kingdoms in the game in my last KVK. The literal strongest kingdoms in the game. And the strongest kingdoms in the game had something like 20 plus billion power worth of farms more than we did. And we know this because there's a new system the developers have put into the game because they're trying to control how insanely overpowered the farm situation is right now and the alt situation is. So this is not a theoretical, you could do this and it might be cool. This is being done. It is defining the way the game is played. So much so the developers are like, hold up, we need to address this. So if you do not have farms and alts, that is a better way to spend your time than just continuing to crank on your main. Now, I hope the developers will change this. The domain system, which I've covered in other videos, aggressively tries to tackle this. In my opinion, not even aggressively enough. I would go in and say like no more than 300 registered accounts per kingdom to play the KVK. It's 900, which means most kingdoms have 150 real players and all the rest are farms. So if you want to be the strongest kingdom in the game, it's no secret what you do. You make enough farms that every KVK you bring in a fresh cycle of farms. Okay, so if you have 150 players and there's 900 spots, all right, that's 750 farms. But if you're smart and you're doing 4 KVKs per year, okay, you could rotate in different farm accounts each KVK. So instead of having 750 farms, you multiply that by 4 and you just use a fresh farm for every KVK. Dude, I'm saying you could do this, you could not do it. Your call. It's the meta. The more you do it, the more your kingdom is going to appreciate you. Don't freaking undervalue farms and alts like many people do. They are insanely powerful free-to-play value in a shocking amount, okay? The final thing is a mistake, a homage back to my early days in Rise of Kingdoms. Okay? And you know this mistake if you're subscribed to the channel, but if you're not, consider subscribing if you've gotten value from this video, which is that if you invest your legendary commander sculptures into gold key commanders, that might seem cool, but once you've maxed them, there's nothing to do. Those gold heads you get from Double C, you open your gold keys, you're just going to keep getting gold heads, and there's nothing to do with them. Not anything good, not anything really valuable, okay? So I maxed Double C as my first legendary commander in the game. I was like, look at me, I have Double C maxed. I'm so cool. Not only was this not particularly the best commander to have chosen, but also now that I have maxed him and used a bunch of universal legendary commander sculptures to go and do it, if I go in to my inventory, all right, my items, how many excess sculptures have I gotten since that time? Oh, I don't know, 1,774. All right. I've maxed Charles Martel. I have 1,758 of those. 1,737 El Cid. All right, now look, most people they're never going to get to this point. But the point I am trying to make is if you put universal legendary commander sculptures in a large volume anyways into these gold key commanders, by the time you get to the end game and you've got access to commanders that are 3 times as powerful, you're going to feel real silly. Because not only are you now not getting value from your gold keys in the way that you could have, but also you spent a bunch of universal legendary commander sculptures that you could have saved for the end game, and you could have had commanders that are at a power level that is just unrecognizable from the early game commanders. Let's talk about that. 1,400 damage factor, okay, on Double C versus one of the newer commanders. Let's find Huo, who's going to drop 2,700 damage factor. Like, what are we talking about, folks? It's not comparable. Okay. Now, the developers have a special building called the Museum to make the early game and end game much more compatible. And it is actually a lot closer than you would think. They just really push the power on raw stats for the most of these commanders in this building called the Museum. So if you're newer to the game, don't worry. Eventually you get the Museum. It does close the gap between the early game commanders and the late game commanders, at least a little bit. And the amount it closes the gap depends on the commander. Some I would say, I cannot believe this commander is getting buffs. They're already good enough. And others I would say, I can't believe the buffs are so little. They're still totally irrelevant to me. All right. But drop your thoughts down below in the comments about these 8 major mistakes that people still make in Rise of Kingdoms. I bet you most people are actively making at least one of these mistakes. And the 2 most common, I would bet, would be treating Alliance Mobilization casually and no farm or alt accounts. I bet you those are the 2 most common of these 8 mistakes, but let me know how many of these errors you've committed if you'd like down below in the comments. I have made the mistake of, let's see here, I probably qualify for at least 2 or 3 of these. It just is what it is, man. So, you know, don't sweat it if you're making too many of these, but do pour one out if you make legendary equipment that you feel like you need to dismantle. That is the fattest L. I am sorry for you. GG. If you're looking for other advice, all right, on how to get value and smash your enemies in Rise of Kingdoms, I make daily guides. So consider subscribing. Check the cards in the end screen for some of my more popular new player guides. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.